the way that a neurodivergent mind works is we are bottom up processors. We can't see the big picture until we understand every piece. For my own mental health, I had to become an expert in grief. My mentality was, if I don't understand this, I can't get past it. Planning ahead is always the most important thing. I see it every day. The difference between what happens if you've planned things out. You don't want to see a family that is having to make decisions while they're grieving, because people to prearrange their funeral and their cemetery so that they have a place, and so that their loved ones aren't left with financial or emotional burden.
Welcome to the Digital Legacy Podcast, where we talk about death and dying in the digital age. If you ever asked, how do I protect myself and those I love if something unexpected happened to me? You're in the right place. I'm your host, Niki Weiss, and together we'll explore how to protect yourself in a world where both your physical and digital legacy leave a lasting impact. And welcome back to another episode of the Digital Legacy Podcast, where we talk about death and dying in the digital age. My guest today, Ryan Bell. Now, Ryan, I found you on LinkedIn because you are not just within the death care space, but you also have a unique personal aspect, being neurodivergent and sharing your experience about how people might be looking and viewing death differently. So welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate the time and being on with you and talking about all this stuff.
All this stuff, right? It's like it's a whole pole of wax. It's like people don't realize, just stepping into the conversation about death. And what got you to this death care space within a Dignity Memorial? That's the company you're currently working for, right? As a
Correct.
advisor?
Family Service Advisor is my title. Yes, what I do is I work with families at their time of need. Um, at need versus pre-need families is the way that we kind of see them. And pre-need, of course, planning ahead is always the most important thing. Um, I see it every day. The difference between what happens if you've planned things out. But my role is really simply to get people to prearrange their funeral and their cemetery so that they have a place, and so that their loved ones aren't left with financial or emotional burden. Because as you can imagine, when people come in and they are at need, there's
They're
multiple
usually at
burdens.
crisis too.
They're usually and that's yeah. Crisis is such a harsh word, and you don't want to see that, and you don't want to see a family that is having to make decisions while they're grieving. Because I think of when you're grieving, you're running two different operating systems. And both of those operating systems, there's a new operating system that shows up, and the old operating system's exhausted from what you're dealing with, and it's just tough. So my job is to make it easier. But yeah, that's what I do. I love my job, and I love the people that I work with, and I work in the Atlanta area. If anybody ever wants to ping me or hit me up, I'll be able to help or get someone that can help you.
Well, I mean, talking about, you must be the life of the party at life of the party, right? Oh, I gotta go talk to Ryan. He's the dead guy, or he talks
Oh,
about, careful about talking to Brian because he might be talking about your funeral arrangements. I mean, do you find that people will shy away from, having a conversation with you because of your passion and expertise?
I quite the opposite. I'm I think that what I do crosses so many different things: spirituality, ritual, culture, understanding everyone else's religion, and and being a part of multiple things. I didn't start out and I didn't go to a guidance counselor, and the guidance counselor was like, "You're going to be really good at death." Like, that's not something that happened. Things happen in your life that lead you to places, and for most of my life, I was kind of like the Forrest Gump feather. I just landed someplace and I did something. And sometimes those things went great, and sometimes those things didn't. But I had a major season of loss in my life some years back. It started in 2021, and it was, it was awful. It was one of those things that was life changing. And I had my friend who had congestive heart failure. He died, and another one of my close friends died. It was a heroin overdose, and my a family member who had been abusive to me passed away, and I had another family member, a toxic relationship, and that ended. And so there were these four very different types of grief that happened all at the same time, and they were really hard for me to process. And
And you were
I
in the
was
death
having
care space. I mean, this you were already
I
in
wasn't
the
I
space.
wasn't no, I wasn't then.
Oh, you were not in there yet. Okay.
This is what caused it.
Hmm.
So um I went to get assessed for depression and anxiety, and that's when, the psychiatrist, this team was like, Mr. Bell, I'm sorry, but this isn't depression and anxiety. We think you're autistic and we think that you have some neurodivergence. So this was the beginning of me understanding that my brain was wired differently than other people's brains. I have autism, um, ADHD. I have Tourette's. So pardon if I cuss. I don't have that type of Tourette's, but it still is. I still that filter doesn't work very well in me sometimes. Um, but at that moment, not at that moment. It wasn't like light bulb. It was more along the lines of, as I figured out my grief and I figured out myself and I figured out my wiring, I realized where I needed to be. As I dealt with these loved ones and these not so great relationships that had died or changed or withered, I started learning about grief and I read everything, because the way that a neurodivergent mind works is we are bottom up processors. We can't see the big picture until we understand every piece. So I had to become, for my own mental health, I had to become an expert in grief. I really did. I had to get my PhD in toxic patterns. I had to get, like that. My mentality was, if I don't understand this, I can't get past it. And I needed so badly to get past it, because any human that's been in grief or in any bad place, that feeling of being stuck, that's the worst part, is feeling like you're not making any motion, being in the fire swamp or whatever.
The inertia.
Um,
And let me just
mhm.
ask, I mean, do you feel, based on what you just went through and as an adult, right? These diagnoses were, you were well in your middle
Yeah.
age by the time you were diagnosed. But now that you have this level of aha self awareness, do you feel like, as you're speaking, that maybe that's part of the reason why people shy away from these conversations? Is that, okay, people who are neurodivergent, we attack problems very differently than,
Hmm.
so you had that, it's a curse and a gift at the same time, right? You had to go into the abyss
Right.
and explore and dive deep into the rabbit hole of, what grief was, what death is about, but you came out of it with this like superpower. A lot of people don't always do that. And then when they are faced with death, instead of diving into it, they do the opposite. They run away. And then when they run away, there's no planning that's done, no conversations.
Yeah. Yeah. I I definitely did that. It's that reframe that you get to when you look at the way that you start to realize that you see things differently than other people. And for neurodivergent people, for me, I've always felt very alien in my own skin. Think of a kid that's a tag is it makes them sensitive. We are very sensitive to this world, and we feel a little bit outside. So the thought of death is just another outside. It's really hard to describe, because you don't realize how differently you think until you realize that a lot of the things that you've been doing all your life are masking and compensating and assimilating. And so since my diagnosis, I have tried my best to understand why I've been the way that I have and why I look at things differently. And that's been kind of my gift to myself and my gift to other people is what I do is I help people and I work with people outside of my work. I do a lot of volunteer work. I work with more private clients on the grief side of things. I love helping them to reframe that because if a neurotypical person is going to look at a problem from the top down. Is going to look at this holistic thing. A neurodivergent person is going to look bottom up, piece by piece. So if you're looking at every single piece of things, then that becomes a lot more interesting, you know?
So then a neurodivergent versus neurotypical, if people aren't familiar
Mhm.
with those terms, and how do you think death, which is like this you like most humanistic unknown? I mean, we really as humans don't know what happens
Yeah, yeah,
on
yeah.
the other side.
I,
Yes, we have like, there are mediums out there and we can, talk about it. And I want to say, if you have a plan, you might not need the medium. If you have a
right.
plan in place and talk about these things while we're in this dimension, in this realm of existence, then that unknown might become less scary and need need for. So if we were to kind of break it down, how do you feel neurodivergent people versus neurotypical people view death and plan
All
for
right. I love this question. I think that the answer is this. Think of neurodivergent folks as they have a special interest, right? I'm just going to use the typical one. Legos or dinosaurs, right? All neurodivergent people tend to have a special interest and they love that. It might be cats. They might know about everything about cats or something like that. If your special interest becomes something like death, for me, or it's not about death, it's about everything that's attached to it. It's about the spirituality, it's about the philosophical aspect, it's about the journey of our lives and everything. So if I'm looking at anything, I'm looking at all the pieces that make it. And with death, death is life, death is everything, death is something that we all will go to, and it is part of our journey. It is part of everything. And if our understanding of if we have a good understanding of death and we really recognize that that's going to happen, it gives us a better life. So
live fully,
like
die ready. It's just,
yeah, we try
you
to
know,
live fully, like I'm not going to be on
fully.
a red yeah, I'm not going to be on a Red Bull commercial jumping out of a plane with no parachute or anything like that. But you know, you're under being connected to this world means we have to know that there's going to be a time that we're not, that we are going to be gone from this world. And I think for me, for neurodivergent people, it's hard to stay connected to this world because this world is not very welcoming. Everything pushes neurodivergent people away. The world is scratchy and loud, and people are chaotic and unpredictable. Um, and so,
Wait, wait,
as a
now,
neurodivergent,
I'm sorry, I'm going to jump in. My neurodivergence is jumping in.
yeah, go for it, go for it.
And I do have, it's so funny if people, yeah, I myself have a very long history of everything you're speaking about, describing what that neurodivergence is and why we feel different and how we act differently. Not to
Do you
dive.
agree?
Uh,
Do you feel kind of a similar thought pattern as what I just described?
well, that's why I'm like my brain is on fire right now. So I mean,
Yeah.
just a tiny little bit of, my interruptedness. Like I tell people, I'm going to interrupt you not because I'm trying to be rude, but because I care. Um,
Right, right.
and I was, just a little bit about my, and everything you're saying to me is like, oh my gosh, he understands me.
Yeah.
I was that kid in the 1970s where we didn't talk about ADHD or ADD or neurodivergence, right? And in the 1970s, I was that kid who always got in trouble, who was always called out to class, who was always being sent to the principal's office, who, where the guidance counselor just said,
Mm,
"You just need to try harder." And I,
right.
couldn't, I remember typing class in ninth grade. Like my stories are endless. And it's not until now into my 50s where I realized like, oh, this has always been a superpower of mine. And even now being in the death space and really embracing this, thanatology study, and people are weirded by it or don't understand it, instead of me shying away feeling like I'm an outsider, like you, I'm embracing it and being like, no, this is our superpower. And we see things in a way that others don't. So I think I appreciate the conversation that we're having right now, because it really is to empower people that just because you don't see it the way we do doesn't mean that it's not true. It's not real. And you talked about chaos. The universe is chaotic. I mean, universally
Mhm.
speaking, the stars, the planets, everything is chaotic, yet there's a pattern that makes sense. So let's continue the conversation. I mean, where do you see how can we explain, if you and I are two neurodivergent people just like having this like, oh my god, he understands me conversation, how do we bring in those neurotypical people who don't see it the way we do, in order for them to see that it's okay to have these conversations and you should plan.
So it's funny. There's a million ways to do it, and I do it all the time. I actually went to a party at my friend's house last night, and to self-care is not going to parties for me, you know? And so I only go to a few that like really actually matter. And the biggest gift you can give yourself is knowing who matters and putting boundaries up for folks that don't. But at this party, I found myself being a little bit overwhelmed because I kept having more and more people come up to talk to me because
About death.
I about yeah, and about where I work and about what I do, because I see the humor in it, and I see people like the amount of laughter that happens inside of our funeral home is something I never would have expected, and to grieve is to release, is to cry, is to write in your journal. You bleed through the pen, you bleed through your paintings, you bleed through your poetry, you bleed through your tears. You got to let it out and make it less big. And so having conversations about death, or really for me is having conversations about life. And so I recently started writing a book on death, and it's kind of like relating the physics of of the universe, and it's philosophical. It's and I'm ex-NASA, which is an interesting story as well. Um, and so I was looking at the serpentine walls in Great Britain, and it was making me think about how, those curvy walls uh, make it so that the builders only have to use one row of bricks. If it was a straight wall, they'd have to use two rows of bricks. So the serpentine walls, actually, because they're a wave pattern, they have more structure and more stability. And so if you think about that in the physical space, and then you think about that in the grief space, our downs means that there's going to be an up, so a lot of times a new grief, a deep grief, a big death is going to cause a new rock bottom for somebody. But a new rock bottom could entail a new height of understanding. We are creatures that are made of waves. We are creatures that communicate through many devices that are using frequencies. We have waves patterns that we don't even understand in our lives. Everything is vibrating. Everything has space in between it. And so Death isn't death. Death is philosophy. Death is spirituality. Death is everything. Death is a void. Death is the unknown. Um, and and yeah, I mean, I think that death can be funny. And when I have younger people that have lost their father come in and they find themselves laughing, I just say simply, if they stop themselves, they're like, oh shit, I shouldn't be laughing. And I'm like, wouldn't your father want you to laugh? And they're like, oh, okay. You need to give yourself a lot of permission in life to to live. There's so many people in this world that look at you in a way that you shouldn't do something like laugh at a funeral or something, but why not play Jimmy Buffett or something? Like I planned funny funerals. I was talking about like playing Jimmy Buffett at the funeral, and they were like, because this guy loved Jimmy Buffett. I was like, why not? Like it doesn't matter. So I think that well, I know that. I'm sorry. I know that the way that death is being perceived and that we are doing ritual now is changing. And that's a beautiful, wonderful thing. And I think that we should look at other religions and see how they're doing it and see what we like and piecemeal our own ritual and decide our own things. Like I was just thinking, it's this simple. It's this simple. If you start your planning with, I really just want on the screens, I just want pictures of me and my kids on the screens at my funeral. That's all I want. You start with that and you say, maybe I make a Google Drive with pictures of me and my kids that I want at my funeral. That's how you start. Why not that? Um, but people don't even think about that. People don't realize that your funeral, your cemetery, it's not so much for you as it is for them. It's not about celebrating or puffing your chest or anything like that. It's about making the other people comfortable and making sure that they have the right information about you and access to your Facebook accounts and access to your bank accounts and access to like all the things because there's so many things that get messed up when you don't plan ahead.
when you don't
And
plan. Let me
yeah,
ask you this. Let me jump in and say,
sure.
this statement I'm going to say. How many times have you heard, "Ah, dead is dead. What do I care? They can figure it out."
Oh my God, it's the absolute worst because I think men are the worst. I know men are the worst at this. The put me in a bag and toss me out. Put me in a
Right. I'm
dumpster.
not leaving this house. I'm going feet first. Like they're very cavalier about it, but they don't realize the logistics that goes behind offboarding someone's life, whether it's,
Right,
20
right.
years or 100 years. There's a lot of details that need to be shut down. So dead is
And
not
the
dead.
the appreciation that people have when things are taken care of, like there's a difference between letting somebody go and burying somebody. You know,
Well, let's talk about that. You said so let's just take a pause. Letting someone go versus burying
mhm.
someone. Two very different, both physical and psychological, emotional ways of
Yeah.
dealing with a loss.
We're dealing with things that are on different planes. And it, there are times where the service is over and the graveside's been done and the dirt's on there and the person's still being carried in a very heavy way. And then there's other times when, the peace happens and kind of the bottom falls out. One of the most and the bottom falls out in this really beautiful way. This like weight hits, and you can feel it on the floor. Um, and it was
You
really
mean, I'm
interesting.
sorry, you mean metaphorically, not
Yeah,
physically.
metaphor. Yeah, no, no, no. We're not dropping
I
caskets
had
in
a
here.
vision.
No,
I
no,
watch a
no,
lot of
no, no.
like uh, TikTok videos of and there's one where
No, no.
they were carrying the
No.
casket and literally the body dropped out of the bottom of the casket and started.
Oh
It was
my
a
God,
very visual. So I just want to
that's terrible.
emphasize that
That's
what you
gross. No,
described was
thank you for that.
is not a vision.
No, no. I'll give you one story. This wonderful couple, Chinese couple, uh, they had their grandparents, and the grandfather had been traveling around in an urn for 20 years. And they got a glass front niche for their grandmother and grandfather, which I think is a wonderful, that's one of my favorite things. The glass front niche, you get to put a picture in there, you have the beautiful urns, and it's something that is more special than a headstone, in my opinion. And I'm a cremation person, like I really like cremation. I think that that's a beautiful way to finish things, and it's simple and elegant. Maybe not elegant, but simple. But anyways, when the grandfather's urn was put in and the glass front niche was closed, there, there was this weird weight that just left the room, and I it was I haven't had that same exact feeling ever before when we closed that, and it was just really, it just felt like everything fell and then settled. It was so odd, but so much relief. It
Well,
was
let me ask
very, very
you
cool.
that you said
Yeah.
this was a grandfather.
Hmm.
So a grandfather who's lived a life, who's built, has built those relationships compared to someone who ended their life,
Mm.
who
Yeah.
took their own life or a sudden and unexpected death. I mean,
Mm.
how do people find resolve? A grandfather who had had a long-term diagnosis, who was struggling, who was, what we call circling the drain of life, right? Is one hospitalization after another. People like they kind of start letting go compared to someone whose life ended suddenly and unexpectedly. How do you find resolve in that?
I don't know that it's about finding resolve.
Or that
I
releasing, that letting go, that what you just described.
I think that's something that is gradual and has to come from the person who's carrying it. And you have to start to, for people that are carrying it, it is the reframe, you have to reframe what ending one's own life really is. Um, I look at it just the same as cancer or any other terminal illness. You have something that could not be stopped, that was an illness, and whatever that date was that it took it, that they took their life,
So we're talking
that's
suicide specifically.
yeah, very
Suicide. Okay.
specifically.
Suicide
Because
versus
that's
car accident, right? So,
yeah, 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 yeah. I think suicide, because there's so much anger related to suicide. Um, even more than accidental overdose or something, like, some of my friends that I've dealt with. Suicide's a harder one, and it's interesting because in that same mausoleum we have, a young man, but you have to recognize that it wasn't them doing something. It was doing it. We look at it like a cancer, but I have a few books that I do recommend to most of my folks, and I think that my favorite is "It's Okay, You're Not Okay" by Megan Devine. I love that book. But you have to learn. where your journey is after someone that is some you lose someone, because that you're still carrying that person with you on your journey. And that's a beautiful thing if you think about grief as companionship. If you think about, their life is still with you in some capacity, because we don't know what's after, and that's a wonderful thing. So grief can open you up spiritually, because you start to wonder, and nobody has the answer. And then if you look at it scientifically, you can be you just have to be curious. And logistically, like, as humans, we've always been stupid. We prove it over and over again. If you look back 20 years ago, we were stupid then. And if you go forward 20 years, then we're going to be stupid and wrong about a lot of things now. And every 100 years. So if we are not questioning what's after this, then we are shutting down life's biggest question. The part of the journey that matters is not knowing what's next, is being present, because we're trying to be right with ourselves. And, in my opinion, God is within. So I have this thing that I work with clients that I call depression compression. So when we are depressed, it is an ask to go within. It is an ask to be by ourselves. And depression is not depression, it is compression. We are looking inside because we are spiritual, we are dancing creatures, we are singing creatures, we are communicating beautiful creatures. The answers are within. So depression is not compression. Depression is an ask for us to go deep within and answer some of the questions. And when we are doing that journey inside, if we haven't done that journey inside, then there are other things that turn up from our past, a lot of different traumas, a lot of different issues that we have not resolved. And go back to your thing about resolve. It's the resolve there that we need to deal with. We need to resolve our own things, because we're carrying this grief with us no matter where we go. And if we do it right, if we do grief or love or care right or anything, and we go within and we look at ourselves and we look at who we are, then there's a certain outwardness that happens, this certain beautiful time when inward becomes and goes back outward, and we're able to look at the world in a different way through ourselves, because God is in us all. Whatever you believe in, God, whatever God you believe in, whether you think it's just the universe or the clockmaker or whatever, I don't care if you're Huxley or Jung or whatever, or Kierkegaard, whatever philosophy you feel about life and the hereafter or nirvana or whatever, you can't get there without going inward first. And grief makes you go inward. So grief is a gift. Going inward is a gift. And the biggest gift you can do is being strong enough to go inward and then outward.
Wow. Grief is a gift. I mean, to be able for people to embrace that, and so with just the couple minutes we have left here, what's your feeling on if we kind of switch into the AI? What do you feel about grief bots?
I think some I think there's an amazing usage for that. I've never been asked that question before.
I mean,
I
we're
used to
stepping in, right? I mean, you said grief is a gift, so is a grief bot a gift, or is that where does it from a ethical standpoint? And again, just with a couple minutes left of our
uh,
conversation.
so it's funny. So one of my friends is started up Clickhole, which is a very funny website. He also put together a predictive text, that would be a very rudimentary type of AI, predictive text. So basically a predictive text keyboard where you feed in a bunch of information, and then you can type out stuff. Um, and so he did it with all the Harry Potters, and then he got a bunch of comedy writers to use the tool to create very funny comedy stuff. So look up Botnick and Harry Potter, and you'll see some very funny text. But I think if you take all the knowledge that you have about someone and put it into something where it can spit out something that they might have said, or in a lot of words and emojis or something like that, we can look at it in many ways. What it is now is just a way to remember. I mean, we can never replicate somebody's soul, and we know that. But we can have different ways that we can communicate, and everybody grieves in different ways. And maybe that's just another part of it. And why
So
why
positive or
not?
negative? Not getting a
Um,
sense. Are you
I
for
think
grief thoughts? Are you
I let's see. It's the creators of the grief bots, and it's the parameters around them.
okay?
But I think that it's like it's a complex question. But if I would work at a company, let's just put it this way. I would work at a company that was doing good and trying to work on AI for grief. I would 100% do it. And if you look at it this way as well, what Headspace, and there's a lot of different therapeutic AI, and they're pretty simple and everything like that. It's just about the parameters. I have no problem with it. So I'm just gonna say positive. I've never been asked this before, and I didn't prepare for this. So,
Oh,
but whatever. It's cool.
well, it's a great answer. Like the jury's still out.
Yeah,
Jury's
yeah,
still out.
yeah. Let's just be
Let's explore.
responsible with it.
Let's explore.
Yeah,
We want it to be helpful and not keep people in their grief, right? Because the idea is to
hmm
move through grief in order to find that new way of being.
Yeah,
Not
yeah.
the
I can definitely understand wanting to communicate still, but I can definitely understand that that could be unhealthy and it could be something. But with all things new, we have to keep an eye on them.
and with that, Ryan, thank you so much for joining. Do you have any takeaways people should be thinking about? 2 to 3 takeaways people can go ahead and do today to get ready for tomorrow.
Hmm. I mean, pre-plan. That's one of the reasons I got into what I do is so that your legacy is told. Um, and, grief is really hard, and I think that being very aware that it's time for you to be easy on yourself and kind to yourself and listen to your internal voice because it's an opportunity for change. Um, and yeah, I think realize that there is such thing as growth after grief, after a hard time. And yeah, I think realize that there is such thing as growth after grief, after hard times, and start to learn about that. Take take grief and love as an opportunity because grief is really, really connected to love.
And with
That's
that,
it.
thank you
Yeah.
so much for sharing your expertise, your passion, and your openness about, how looking at death is not it's not two-dimensional, that's for sure. We need to be looking at it.
No,
We need to be
no,
looking at
no,
it. If
no.
people wanted to find you, get in touch with you, best way for them to locate you?
I think I'm usually on Instagram. It's funny. People will reach out to me there at Ryan Bell Guide, um, and then Bell Guidance would be my regular thing. But yeah, I'm happy to connect. I love learning new things. I love meeting new folks, and I love hearing all the stories and helping folks out. But thank you so much for having me on, Nikki. You're a great interviewer. Good job, my friend.
We'll end here. Thank you so much for joining. Thank you for listening to the Digital Legacy Podcast, where we talk about death and dying in the digital age. I hope this conversation inspired you to take control and plan for the inevitable to protect yourself and those you leave behind. Don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter at digitallegacypodcast.com. Remember, life is full of surprises. What happens after you die shouldn't be. So keep your passwords safe and your playbook up to date.